Okay, thank you and welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Shaw and I'm Programme Director for the Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium. And I'll be facilitating our session today, which is about leveraging transformative innovation policy for regional development and for regional transformation. So we've had a really good response to this session, lots of people joining from all over the world, and I think it really shows how much interest there is in applying transformative approaches within territories and regions, not just within Europe, but much wider response as well. So I'm joined by some excellent colleagues and partners today. So very happy to introduce Miriam Asebeyeobake, who is a researcher from Ingenio and one of the coordinating partners of TIPSI. Miriam's also involved in the experimental action research with the government of Catalonia, which you'll be hearing about today. We have Farhan Dalmau and Shema Asuzi, who are joining us from the government of Catalonia, working with transformative innovation principles and methodologies. And also Christian Matti, who's a senior researcher from the European Commission Joint Research Centre and has been working for many years in that space between research policy and practice for transformative system change. So today we'll be looking at how transformative innovation policy can be interpreted and adapted within regions to improve the lives of citizens, and particularly by shifting socio-technical systems that meet our basic needs, whether that's for energy, transport, food or health, towards more sustainable and equitable futures. So today we're going to start by introducing the basics of transformative innovation policy, looking at some of the features and the principles. And then we will invite you to share your own regional challenges and the kinds of questions that you're dealing with and facing and that you want to learn about in terms of TIP via Mentimeter. We'll then move on to some case studies, looking at how researchers and practitioners are actually adapting these frameworks in practice to address their regional challenges. And we'll move that into a panel discussion where we draw on the points that you've raised during the Mentimeter phase to unpack some of the issues in greater depth. And we'll finish by closing and signposting some of the resources so that if you wish to learn more about this and you wish to take this further, that you can. I also wanted to start by thanking UNECE's Regional Forum on Sustainable Development for the very kind invitation to host this side event and to contribute to the shared understanding of how the 2030 agenda is being implemented within the UNECE region. I'd also like to say a special thanks to the UNECE Transformative Innovation Network, ETIN. This is a strategic platform for peer learning, and we're part of the core group and really happy to have Anders Jonsson here today, who's the chief of the innovation policy section at UNECE and has kindly offered to say a few words about ETIN and the work that it's doing to advance transformative innovation in the region. Over to you, Anders.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you very much for the invitation and for the organization of this event. It was a positive surprise. I came back from vacation and just found out, but it's a great opportunity, and this is exactly the kind of events that we should do as much as possible together. So ETIN is a project that I personally worked very hard on at the beginning. And it seemed to me almost a little bit like a pipe dream. I've been through many projects where we talk about having a vibrant network. We always say stakeholder consultations. We always say everything is bottom up. But in reality, it's still been the secretariat that have had to push things. And it's been hard to create sort of the dynamism that I had in my mind. And I think with ETIN, we've actually managed to do much more than what I thought was reasonably to be expected at the time, especially given that we come from a very formal international organization. And I think where ETIN really can and should also in the future be able to provide value is to think about the practice, the difference between the ambitions that we have of sustainability, of mission orientation, directionality, and the practice, the nitty-gritty of policy making, the project financing logic, all of the things that come up in practice that make the policy and institutional innovation that is also necessary to support transformative innovation difficult in practice. And we keep seeing the same problems, and we keep seeing a lot of very vibrant, interesting discussions, especially if we get people to talk about what's not working, what are their frustrations of the day. You can maybe even see it like a group therapy session. And so many things come up from that dynamic, and that's what we want to sustain. And place-based development is actually one angle that I am personally also very interested in using in ETN in a separate work stream, but also as an angle for most of the activities that we do. One reason for that is that we've been talking about the death of distance for a very long time. We talked about it when we had telegraphs, even when we had the first postal service. But there's still a reason why companies locate in Silicon Valley, here in Geneva, or in London, where they have to pay 4 or 5 times the salaries that they would have to pay elsewhere. It's because being close to people, being able to talk to people, being able to find out the nitty-gritty of what people do, that's where the dynamism comes. That's where you get all the factors that you need for transformative innovation. And another point is that it's in places where you see the most interesting combination of factors, where you see surprising developments, new sectors coming up that can diffuse into the rest of the economy. We don't know which ones, which is part of the problem from a policymaking perspective. But we need to nurture them, and we need to think about them carefully, and think especially about policy innovation. The third is that a lot of the standard saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. I wouldn't sort of say that we should always, think about it that way. But once you start thinking about rural areas, for instance, and the needs that they have, and you think of examples like the dirt poor medieval Dutch walling off their entire country and freeing up 30% more land by looking at beavers and them becoming specialists in what is needed now, protecting countries from rising oceans and other dangers, has become a specialty. Another is in Norway. There are a lot of experiments with autonomous ferries, because you have to get around, and there are not many people. The labor force is not very large. The cost is very high, and of course there is oil money also to experiment. Which could be something that could be exported also into the rest of the world. And in fact, partly it's happening already to Chile, of all places, which actually has the same topographical conditions as northern Norway. And the final point, which I find the most interesting, is that for policy innovation to happen, we need freedom to experiment. We need actual what's called regulatory sandboxes. We need to try out all kinds of crazy things. But we need to do that at a small scale. We need to be open about it, and we need to learn. And there are many things that can we do. If you think of public procurement, for instance, why not next time we build a city park, just pay an entrepreneur a certain amount based on sensors measuring the number of visitors. Imagine how creative that entrepreneur will be in finding out ways to make sure that as many people come, even when it's raining, and they have the right concession stands and the food stands, and it's not going to cost more than it will cost to build a park anyway. That's the kind of entrepreneurship and dynamism that I think is important to think about building up. But it's often not going to fit within the regular project financing logic, the regular public procurement logic that is out there. So you need. So I think it's in smaller places and cities where you can carve out room for these kinds of experiments that we can then discuss and learn from, and the good ones we hope will be ones that spread. What we would like to do with ETN is to promote this dynamism and to find engaged people like the participants here, like Tipsy. To really talk about what are the actual experiments on the ground that are happening, what are the problems that people come up with in practice, what's happening, for instance, with the smart specialization projects, which is the economic logic and the empirical evidence behind the assumptions are very good and very solid. This is how most innovation happens. But how is this working in practice? How do you consolidate this with a project financing logic? How do you have to have some kind of plan? How do you plan when innovation is not something that you can plan? In fact, we're terrible at predicting innovation. So how do you sort of square the circle? And we want to bring together people who are thinking in this way, people who really want to do something, but also know sort of the problems that come up in practice, and also thought of solutions, some of which have worked, some of which have not worked, but come together to learn from one another and maybe come up with joint initiatives, because we're a very member-driven network. We want as many people as possible to come in and say, we want to do this, and we will do everything to support that. That's, I think, the most essential principle that we want to hold ourselves accountable to. So I very much look forward to the discussion. I'll send a link to Etin for people who are interested, and we would love to talk to you and to have you and welcome your ideas, and hope we can support this work in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the warm welcome to the Regional Forum. And I think that question you posed, how is this working in practice? This is absolutely what this session is about. We really want to relate the theory to work on the ground as much as possible, focus on application. And this session's been designed as introductory, so it's geared towards newcomers. I noticed from the registration we have quite a few people who are already familiar with TIP, but the idea is that we try and make it as accessible as possible today. So before we move on to the theory and what is Transformative Innovation Policy, I wanted to introduce TIPSI. TIPSI is a partnership of innovation agencies. It's led by the Department of Science and Innovation in South Africa, by Cenacit in Panama, and by Vinnova in Sweden. And over the past around 8 years now, members have been looking to challenge frames of STI policy thinking much more towards the SDGs and transformation. We're also aiming to generate a network of people working from transformative perspectives globally, and to work with other networks in that spirit, and to build a community of demonstrators who are experimenting and actually implementing and evaluating this on the ground. So I'll move over now to Miriam, who will say a little bit about what we mean by transitions and how transformative innovation policy fits into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and good afternoon, everyone. As Vicky mentioned, we wanted to share key frameworks that we have adapted or developed in the consortium. And after this presentation, you will see how they have been applied at the regional level. We understand that for those new to transformative innovation policies, this might be a lot of information. However, we believe it's important to share these insights to spark your own research and curiosity. So if you are interested in exploring TIP further, we hope this is useful as an interesting starting point. So let's go through it. At the heart of the consortium and our understanding of transformative innovation policies is the recognition that humanity faces complex and interconnected environmental and social challenges at global scale that have specific expressions at the local and regional levels. This is also to say that as time goes by, and while in many places we have seen significant improvements in life expectancy and material welfare in the last decades, deep-rooted issues remain: economic crisis, growing inequality, and also we are increasingly realizing that our current socio-technical systems, such as food, energy, mobility, and others, are unsustainable. So, grounded on sustainability transitions research, transformative innovation policies emphasizes the need for systemic change to address both environmental crises and pressing social issues like inequality. In our approach, to start transforming means thinking about how systems change, and to do that, we apply the concept of a socio-technical system. Under this understanding, a socio-technical transition is a fundamental shift in how society functions. It goes beyond technological advancements to include changes in policies, markets, cultural norms, and human behavior. And if, as an example of this, if we consider the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, or the transformation of traditional manufacturing through automation, researchers find that these transitions take time, are not linear, and involve multiple actors and require coordinated efforts across different sectors. The understanding of socio-technical systems includes the different actors that are part of them, and the rules that we also call routines or practices that shape their interactions and behaviors. So in a nutshell, a socio-technical system can be defined as the one that meets social needs, such as the energy, access to food, mobility, and not only through material resources, but also through cultural and symbolic meanings. Understanding these systems helps us see why change is difficult. Systems are resilient because they are embedded in political, economic, and social structures. You see in the figure that we understand the functioning of systems through 5 components. And this heuristic is helpful for us analytically and practically. And you will see later that the pentagonal maps, as we also call them, are extensively used to promote systems thinking to address place-based and challenge-based innovative policymaking in regions such as Catalonia. So next slide, please, Vicky. Thank you very much. The Transformative Innovation Policy Framework uses the multi-level perspective to analyze transitions towards sustainability and to intervene in transformation processes to transform regimes of unsustainable socio-technical systems. When working together with policymakers, we often refer to the multi-level perspective as our generic theory of change. This multi-level perspective, the multi-level perspective understands transitions from the interrelationship of 3 levels, which are the landscape or panorama, which represents macro trends and shocks that may happen at different scales. For example, taking the case of the energy system, the Ukraine war can be understood as a shock. And climate change is a trend pressing the current configurations of the regime. And in turn, the regimes or dominant practices in a socio-technical system form the deep structure that maintains the stability of a given socio-technical system. So if we consider the energy system, its regime can be understood by analyzing the main characteristics of how it functions within the 5 components that I have just mentioned in the previous slide. Third, niches are alternative configurations to dominant systems. For instance, in the case of the energy system, a niche may be that of renewable energies with local and community practices of production and consumption. We can also consider, we could also see niches in renewable energy startups will also be part of these energy niches. Prosumers, energy cooperatives, they can be thought as configuring niches. Within this understanding, transitions are movements from one system configuration to another one. And these movements occur because dominant regimes are altered from bottom up, from the niches of innovation and experimentation that are opening and proposing new practices, and from the top down, that is through landscape pressures and shocks that may reconfigure the regime. So, considering the frameworks presented so far, transformative innovation policies are focused on contributing to system change. Our approach broadens the understanding of innovation, including civil society and citizens, and not only as consumers and adapters of innovations, but also as promoters and sources of innovations and knowledge that address social and environmental needs. It incorporates new forms of innovation, going beyond the technological ones and including social innovations, and focuses on organizational change, new business models, and new forms of collaboration between actors. As we understand them in TIPSI, transformative innovation policies have a strong experimentation character, and in the consortium, we have agreed on a set of principles to guide us in defining these policies. Here in this table, you have the proposal of these principles, and I will only briefly mention them. First, we have embracing directionality, which can be understood as our guiding principle, entailing that when doing transformative innovation policies, we have to encourage the exploration of diverse alternatives, and we have to broaden the range of perspectives and understandings that are included in the innovation process. We also aim at orienting our efforts towards societal goals, recognizing that technologies are non-neutral. We aim at promoting the adoption of a systemic perspective. Also, it's key to foster learning and reflexivity throughout transformative innovation policy making. That is also to say that we aim at fostering second order learning processes. And finally, we see transformative innovation policies as based in democratic decision-making principles. So deliberative and participatory processes are at the core of our understanding of this type of policies. There is also an understanding of justice and in the way we include those actors of those collective, those group of actors that are not, that may be discriminated against or not generally participating in this type of socio-technical of regimes or socio-technical regimes. So, and the next and final slide, knowing that Christian may later comment on this, I want to briefly mention that since actors working on transformative innovation policies trying to generate transitions towards sustainability do so without having direct control over the systems in which we operate, we use the transformative outcomes to discuss whether progress has been made in the desired direction. Transformative outcomes are a central framework to guide efforts in our interventions, and they are based on the theory of transitions and experimentation processes. In the consortium, we propose 3 transformative processes: the construction and strengthening of niches. The second one is a process covering outcomes related to the expansion and scaling of niches. And the third process refers to outcomes that aim at opening and unblocking the regimes. There are 4 transformative outcomes within each process, which I have not detailed in this slide, and we will provide the resources to explore further all these tools. Now, after this quick walk around transformative innovation policies fundamentals, I hand it over to Vicky, who I believe will propose resources that you may use to delve further and to experiment with TIP approaches. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Miriam. And we're going to be hearing how practitioners and researchers have adapted these frameworks to address their own regional challenges. And before we move on to that, I wanted to touch on some of the tools and resources that the consortium has developed over the last few years to support this work, because they will be referring to these during their talks. So one of these is a tool called the Pentagonal Map for System Analysis. It allows practitioners to consider the actors and the materials and the rules within the system in order to identify the regime. You know, this is how things get done around here in this system. And all of these tools are open access. You can take them and play with them. Another tool that we'll be touching on related to the concept is the multi-level theory of change, which is based on the multi-level perspective of how change happens in a socio-technical system, looking at the emergence of niches, as Miriam has described, and how external, larger scale patterns and pressures can put pressure on how things are done in that system. We'll also be talking a little bit today, Christian will, on transformative outcomes. How do we know that change is happening in the system? And we have some tools in the resource lab, which we'll get to later in the session, explaining where those are, that describe the macro processes and the different elements of those macro processes that contribute to change and that help us know whether we can actually identify that some shift is happening. And finally, the principles that Miriam mentioned, we have tools in the resource lab that introduce these that can help you to score interventions and to think, oh, how transformative is this potentially as an experiment, looking at those principles in order to stretch the systemic potential of work that you're doing. So you'll hear a bit more about how these things have been used in practice now. So we'll be moving on to initially Christian in the first instance. But before we do that, we wanted to understand a little bit from your perspective to have you think about what systemic challenges are facing citizens in your own region. Could be anything from water pollution to deforestation or, whatever it is. We'd like to know what kinds of systemic challenges you're facing. And also we'd like to know what you want to learn about transformative innovation policy, because this will help us to configure the discussion later in the session today. So I'll just leave this up for a couple of moments. If you have a phone with you, you can use the QR code, or you can go to the website menti.com and enter the code, which is 52232859. And we'll invite you, there's no rush to do this, but we would love to hear your responses to these questions so we can return to these when we move on to the panel discussion. Okay, so in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Christian, who is going to talk a little bit about how this is being used within the European context, based on work with the European Commission, JRC. Christian, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I'm very happy to be here presenting some insights about what we have been doing at the European Commission at the Joint Research Center by bringing alive the concept of transformative innovation policy, in particularly by thinking in a place-based perspective, but also in collaboration between different places to understand this, how this multi-level perspective and how these concepts such as landscape or socio-technical systems works in practice. So I'm going to mostly share with you some examples, but also bring in some kind of questions, mostly questions about why transformative innovation policy can help us to asking ourselves if we are trying to address a transformative change or not, and trying to find some directionality in terms of connecting the dots into a more sustainable future. So my overall presentation is going to be around what the work that we are doing right now, that is using the concept of navigating opportunity spaces, and it's very much related with this idea about identifying opportunities to transform our systems. And it's going to focus on the topic of climate adaptation, about how the interplay between innovation policy and climate adaptation can happen, and how we can identify opportunities there. And in order to do that, how we can actually bring transformation as part of that interplay. So as Vicky mentioned before, I'm part of the Joint Research Center, but I'm belonging to two teams that makes a lot of sense to make reference because of this transformative aspect. I work with people on transformative territories, like working with regions, but also in the European Policy Lab by bringing design for policy and foresight to policy making. And I think this is an important part of how we make transformative innovation policy happen, by combining different approaches and different techniques to understand the change that needs to happen. So let's start. So the first thing that I would like to mention is that actually the territories and the regions are already facing interconnected challenge. And that means that they really need to understand how to address those challenges in a different way and in a transformative way. So there are different complex systems, such as climate emergency, in different territories and in different situations that could be from floods to heat waves, or water management issue in general, but also in the dynamic landscape that we are having right now, especially with the new geopolitical situation that we need to navigate, and we need to understand how that affects the way that we are going to live, but also how we are going to create new employments by looking at particular aspects that are all part of the same system, like circular economy, climate adaptation, but also the emergence of new technologies as artificial intelligence, or supporting the digital transitions in sectors such as farming. For doing that, for facing that dynamic landscape and challenge, we have multiple instruments, and the regions need to deal with this kind of fragmentation of funding and instruments and regulations that makes this transformative change a real challenge within the challenge. But also considering the diversity of settings and these systems, one region different from another, we can identify similar challenges, but also different speeds. So there is this kind of persistent divide, especially in Europe, but globally, about different regions that have different capacities and move at a different pace. So that's why it's important to understand change and how we can anticipate and actually react, but also innovate in terms of understanding all these challenges as part of a transformation that is more radical rather than marginal. And we need new frameworks and competence and mindsets for that. My presentation is trying to highlight and illustrate the different examples that we can identify about what is happening in the ground on different regions and different practices to bring this transformative innovation logic alive. So these are the first two provocative questions. So how we can ensure that the complexities of this transformative innovation is translated into actionable policies and decisions, how we move forward into practice. And what are the challenges of co-creating meaning and shared understanding when we think about not just policymakers, but other stakeholders in terms of looking together forward towards a sustainable future. So let me give you a couple of ideas about how we understand that we can conceptualize, but also moving forward with that. And I want to use this simple concept of conversations. So yes, we already mentioned the idea of complex systems, and what happens in the territories is that we are having isolated conversations sometimes on climate, on industry, how we bring innovation, we have the agri-food, the energy food, and the reality is in order to be transformative, we really need to connect the dots, and in order to do that, we need to contextualize that into a particular challenge or a particular logic that has to do with our goals. So this transformative elements is about connecting all these systems as part of what is happening in our socio-technical system. But the point is, okay, we agree to have a shared vision, but how we move forward? Well, the reality is that we really need to connect the ideas into a framework, into a specific regional context and the regional resources. So we might have different discussion on transformative innovation around a goal, and there are different interconnected systems. We can think, for example, about what does it mean for climate adaptation in terms of infrastructure, but also in the governance of dealing with climate adaptation. But also we can think about the nexus between water and energy, still part of the regional development, but they are interconnected conversations. The reality is that the regions actually are not isolated as part of different systems, as part of countries, continents, and value chains. So the last part of this conversation that needs to happen is how we consolidate that as part of something that is happening everywhere in terms of value change. What does it mean, this digital transition? What does it mean to understand risk management or disaster management in climate change, and how we use data to better prepare our cities and our systems to resist to climate adaptation? So what I'm saying is that this is about conversations and dialogues between different actors and using knowledge and resources to set the priorities, but also to move forward. Let's try to bring some ideas on that. So the first thing that I want to bring, and it's also very practical, is like how we shape these opportunities through conversation, through implementation. Sometimes we really focus on formulating policies and strategies, but the reality is that the regions and the stakeholders are working all the time with actions and process and projects. So implementation involves policies, but also these strategies in the practice, action plans with public and private actors. And the key aspect is that the timing is now as is in the future, but we really need to think in a continuous with the place-based conditions and the capacity of the actors to act in that moment. So the question here in terms of this implementation process is how we can turn implementing, working in practice, experimenting as a dynamic opportunity to innovate and connecting the dots for example, innovation and climate change. The second concept that I want to bring that is a practical concept is how we use this idea of portfolios. So portfolios is combining different things that we have in our hands, policies, instruments, financial resources. In the case of climate adaptation, is related to how the climate challenge can be introduced as part of adaptable strategies. Later on, the colleagues from Catalonia are going to talk about the smart specialization adaptation in two different concepts. So that's one of the critical examples about how we address innovation and other topics, and how we try to bring interventions as part of this kind of dynamic continuum. So the question here is that can we design a policy portfolio to bridge that gap? Portfolio as something dynamic and flexible that evolves over time. The last provocation is about the who. So there is a multi-level governance. And for climate resilience, it's very important because we just not have the political element, but also the business, how the business adapt and society in terms of practices and new elements that needs to be addressed in climate action, how we create new cooperation in governance levels and sectors in terms of, for example, not only investment in infrastructure or new technology, but also in the management of that, how we think in new business model on that, and how we create this capacity as part of this new governance structure for moving forward together. So this last question is about governance structures and how we actually already design governance structure to move forward with this transformative innovation. So with these three questions, I'm going now to present a couple of examples on how this looks in practice. And for doing that, we are going to consider this kind of different map of activities. What does it mean, transformative innovation in practice? And also when we think about a place-based approach, it's about a collection of activities, as I mentioned before, in terms of portfolio. It's about engagement with the stakeholder, look at the future, envisioning, orchestrate different relations and different collaborations between actors and different levels, designing new strategies and instruments, fundamentally implementing that as part of a continuum, and of course, learning about that. So this can look like this, like interconnected over time, a continuous of activities and process that, for example, can have a goal of creating a partnership for regional innovation. Let's bring the first example, but before, two more provocative questions. Because I'm trying to sell transformative innovation, but we talk about transformative innovation, but what happens if we are merely tweaking the edges of a broken system, okay, and we are not radical enough? What if our understanding of transformative innovation is not that transformative? And this is something that we are going to see into the example, but also in terms of the use of instruments as transformative outcomes to trigger the discussion and the conversation with the different stakeholders. First example, this is a Horizon project that is already happening and is working. There are multiple actors in this project, but I want just to highlight the region of Murcia that is bringing together a network of municipalities that are trying to work on climate action. So the regional ministry is supporting different actors and 11 municipalities to develop their sustainable energy and climate action plan as part of the Covenant of Mayors. And how they are doing that? yes, as you can imagine, with workshop participatory methods, but also orchestrating different type of elements from the system in terms of using data and science. That's why the role of the universities is very important to bring new understanding on how we can deal with climate change, but also collaborating with other Mediterranean regions. So what we see here is that different actors are using different resources to address the challenge on the go by using the existing knowledge and the existing resources. So the attractive element about this is that the project provides learning to regional local governments to develop action plans, but also experimenting as part of that with new data, new decision-making process as part of this interconnection with universities. And the idea is trying to target specific issues about climate adaptation, like the vulnerability on extreme heat and water scarcity, but also bringing a scalable solution to similar regions as part of a collaboration. So as you can see in the ecosystem, there are multiple activities, multiple organizations working with different resources as part of a portfolio of different actions. As part of the same narrative of navigating and understanding opportunity spaces, this is another project that has already finalized and from which we have a lot of lessons learned that is related to a cross-border collaboration on climate adaptation in marine protected areas. And for example, with the Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. And the idea is developing management plan for marine ecosystem. And the good thing about this is that it involves different type of actors, including local community researchers, agencies, but also regional authorities in trying to understand how we can better understand the challenge of the maritime ecosystem, but also how we can better take decisions and understand how we can anticipate the different changes as part of climate adaptation. And again, this is about the cross-border governance, but also participation in understanding activities between local communities, government, but also academic institutions in terms of a better understanding on this challenging issue about climate adaptation. So it's a replicable model, and it can be used for different climate adaptation and mitigation strategies in terms of how we orchestrate and co-design as part of a place-based this kind of a strategy by using different type of knowledge and different needs and different capacity to act. And it's a very good example of coordinated effort about multiple countries. So it's still place-based, but there is this kind of transformative aspect about understanding ecosystem from a kind of a more holistic approach in terms of what is happening globally. The third example that I want to bring is very practical, and it's going to resonate also with what you are going to listen later about what is going on in Catalonia with the risk gap. Is how we bring the logic of transformative innovation to an emerging community. Right now, there is a discussion on Industry 5.0 at the European Union about how we can move forward with industrial transition, how we can have a better understanding of what we can do. And when we think about Industry 5.0, we have activated, and many people will recognize this discussion about what does it mean competitiveness now as part of the global challenge with the global powers, with the different confrontations between globally in terms of trade, but also technologically speaking, but also sustainability and resilience, how we adapt our industry for the future. But an additional element that Industry 5.0 brings is this idea about human centricity approach in terms of the challenge of AI and digitalization. So what we have done with this community of practice is bring to practice actually the transformative innovation logic by mapping out the opportunities that we have, we can identify in our ecosystem. It's kind of attractive that this is an exercise that we have already run with the ETIN Transformative Forum in October, but also with the Tipsy Engagement Week in September. And now we are learning about that and implementing this in this community. The attractive thing about that is this is not just another mapping or a map. So we have done an exercise with 100 participants, and we brought all that information back in March to challenge them again and said, this is what you are proposing as a portfolio of different activities. And you can see in the right the slide, the result of one of the topic on understanding creation of network as hubs on Industry 5.0 all over Europe. So this is what you are proposing. And the attractive thing about this is you say, well, this is what you are proposing, but is this transformative enough? How we can use actually concept as transformative outcomes to challenge our mindset in terms of moving forward. So what we ask to the participants again is that what is the role of nurturing, opening up, and even scaling up some of the opportunities that you see there in order to be transformative? Where are the opportunities and the gaps in the system where we can really be transformative? And we use the transformative outcomes to challenge, is this transformative enough? How we can better connect the dots? Or what are the kind of the opportunities to really bring some radical change in the system as part of what we are doing? And what we share with them as a card are these 3 cards. And for me, it's important to share this with you because different from what you have seen from Miriam, you can see that we change and we tweak the names of the transformative outcomes. And this is particularly important when you work between science and practice. You really need to make it actionable. So looking at, for example, we do not use regimes. In some countries, for example, using regimes could be politically not very correct, okay, because of the past. So we use just existing systems, structures, and accepted realities. So this is part of being transformative, is bringing science into practice and modifying the different elements to make it work. So it works, actually, and we managed to contextualize Industry 5.0 in terms of long-term impacts, not just what we can do as a business model tomorrow, but in terms of the change that we can do, identifying portfolio of actions in the different areas, but also consolidating that as part of the action plan of this year and next year. So it works to use this kind of approaches to open the minds of the people and trying to see how we can channel the different resources and knowledge to work together. So the last insights, it's very, future of policymaking is not just about predicting the future. Transformative innovation is not about thinking about the future, but it's also about co-creating and using system thinking to understand the complexity, embrace the complexity, not simplifying, embrace the complexity. And let's say that transformative innovation is not just a framework, but it's also a mindset for transformative change, and require that policymakers and society as a whole, like universities, business, think differently, act differently, but also collaborate in a different way. Finally, I think the biggest challenge for a sustainable future as part of these examples and what we are looking at is not the lack of knowledge or technology, but the courage to challenge the existing power structures and assumptions, and actually do this stress testing about, is this the structure and the governance and the actions that really are going to transform the systems in a way that we can move into a sustainable future? Well, that's the role of this kind of instruments and this framing to help us to answer those questions. So this material that I presented is part of a publication that we are going to published recently on navigating opportunity spaces, where you can also have the examples and the experience from the work that we have done with ETIN and the Transformative Policy Consortium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. That's a really interesting overview. I think let's move on to Ferran and Chais. We'd love to hear about how this is being interpreted in Catalonia.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for attending and for listening to us. Me, Ferran, and Chaima, my colleague, we're going to talk to you about this particular case, which is the case of Catalonia, or the regional government of Catalonia, Generalitat de Catalunya. And we, as a government, and especially in our unit, we use this tool that is the smart specialization tool. In our case, and this name is RFSD, to somehow develop a little bit further this transformative innovation policy framework and implement it into our territory. we face these complex challenges that our colleagues have been talking about. We see that it's difficult to tackle these challenges, and in using the transformative innovation policy framework, we have found a way to make it possible and to make it happen. So the first thing that we have thought about when using this framework is exactly what kind of challenges we were tackling. And specifically, the kind of challenges that we were tackling are complex challenges, which are defined by these the different aspects. So we don't have a lot of data about these challenges. Maybe there are a lot of people working on this challenge, or that are interested in these challenges. There are different perspectives, and no one on their own field and on their own can really tackle this challenge and overcome it for the whole society. So understanding this, understanding the nature of the complex challenges that we are facing was the first step into trying to tackle them. And this led us to think that if we didn't have a systemic understanding of these challenges, it was going to be impossible to tackle them in the correct way. And here is where we found the transformative innovation policy framework, and particularly this idea of the multi-level perspective framework that really helped us make sense of how we could direct and define our policy under this umbrella of the smarter specialization strategy to tackle these territorial challenges in Catalonia, which are very diverse and in very different topics. So as I was saying, we found a lot of inspiration in this multi-level perspective, because it really helped us understand how we were trying to relate and work with these complex challenges. So we had this idea, or this understanding, that we have these global trends, this landscape that is putting pressure to our society, global trends that we cannot influence from Catalonia, which is a very small region in Spain, but that nonetheless affect the way we live. But these global trends, they really put a lot of pressure in our society, and with this pressure they do two basic things. The first of all is that it makes our current systems, and as we said before, socio-technical systems, dysfunctional in the terms that they are not adapted enough to this new landscape, and they are not delivering the expected results. And also by this, the global trends open opportunities for new alternative and practices to come into the arena. And we focus, as you see in this graphic, in how we can help these alternative practices emerge, and how we can help them influence the current systems to go towards this shared vision of the future, this new regime configuration that we are intending to move towards. And in our case, when we think about niches, we are not thinking especially about the specific actors only, but we're thinking more of this kind of places, this kind of spaces where different actors that are related to a complex challenge, they can experiment and build alternative practices. And then in focusing on these spaces and trying to create these spaces and nurture these spaces, we really see how this helps us influence the current socio-technical systems and the current regimes. So it's in this point, and somehow applying these three main transformative outcomes processes that Miriam talked you about before. This is how we can help transform the systems, and by doing this, we can help them adapt better to the complex challenges that we're facing. In our case, the space where we can help the actors meet and experiment and build these alternative practices is through innovation camps. So these are spaces where actors that are all together around a complex challenge, a specific complex challenge, and that they are starting to build and to follow a same shared vision. They meet together and they analyze through this systemic lens their challenge. We try in these spaces to really make them realize the nature of their challenge, to realize that on their own and with their own skills and their own knowledge alone, that they cannot face the challenge, and that they need to understand the bigger picture. And there is where this tool that was presented, the pentagonal map, is very helpful. And you will see now in different examples afterwards that we use very much this tool to start this conversation. Finally, in these spaces, in innovation camps, it is a space where these different actors, they also question the version or the idea about the challenge and about the regime that they had before, and then they change the relation they had with these regimes. And finally, very important, in these spaces, all the actors together, did they think about the challenge? Did they think about the problems? They think about the shared vision that they want to go towards, and they start to define and propose actions to move towards this direction. So now I will hand the presentation to my colleague Shaima, that will start introducing some of the examples of specific innovation camps and specific challenges that we have addressed using this methodology.
Yes, thank you so much, Ferran. So we wanted to take some minutes to explain practical examples that we've worked in different scales, because it's really useful, I think, to also explain how we articulate these innovation camps in different contexts and different needs according to the stakeholders, and what are the objectives of each group of stakeholders working across a challenge, no? And in different scales, we kind of a key idea that we wanted to translate here as well is that innovation camps are really instrumental, in the sense that they are part of a broader transformative innovation process. So when we use them, no, as Ferran and Miriam also explained, to coordinate these actors, and we adapt the methodology according to this context, no. So the first example that we wanted to share with you is the innovation camp that we organized last year in the context of the Interreg Euromed program, the Mission Innovative Sustainable Economy, setting across the challenge of the population in rural and remote areas in the Mediterranean. So we used the format of an innovation camp in this Mediterranean scale. So we gathered our Med community, all the partners, no, that are part of this consortium, universities, innovation projects, SMEs, authorities, etc., for a very high intensity working sessions, no. So we worked, yes, across the challenge, which is a complex challenge related to sustainability, and we set a guiding star, which is this shared vision of the future, which is a stronger, more connected, resilient, and prosperous rural and remote areas in the Mediterranean. And we organized several working sessions. If you can, Ferran, please go to the next slide. Yes. So we will not get into much detail, because we also want to have a fruitful discussion as well with you. So you also have references and all the reporting in much detail about the working sessions. But we worked around this challenge. We set this shared vision of the future in the framework of a guiding star. So the first exercise, no, is this problem framework wheel, where we divide the, we divide the groups and participants in several groups, with one facilitator and one relator, which is like the people that are facilitating this group dynamic. And we start with the first exercise, which is the problem framing wheel. Is a brainstorming exercise, is where participants do this initial characterization of the challenge, no? Then we move to the pentagon of the current system, and what are the main obstacles and facilitators, like the elements that inhibit us from advancing to our shared vision of the future, and which elements facilitate advancing to this shared vision of the future. So it's these two kind of factors within these 5 dimensions. So here we do this first exercise of systemic analysis, and sharing, no, this making sense of the challenge in a systemic way. No, it's this first systemic analysis. No, then we go to this green pentagon, which is how we characterize the future system. Okay, now we live in 2070. We are so happy living in this ideal system. How we manage not to how what are the characteristics of this envisioned system? We finally live in this system. How does it look like? No, so we do the characterization of this scenario in the 5 dimensions. And then we work in a transition pathways. No, we try to envision and imagine these pathways. What we did to achieve this system. No, we use this 2 loops model, and then we try to reflect about what we need to let go, what we encouraged in creating, no, and these emergent new alternative practices, and how then we achieve this future system, what we kept as well from the old system. No, so these exercises are really important because, as Miriam said before, they exercise reflexibility. They mean, like, this means that with participants, we envision this shared vision of the future. We do this envisioning exercise. We envision the transition pathways. And this is what help us do this alignment, no, between actors and stakeholders. And this is really key, no, this alignment towards a shared directionality. So this is key. So this is a first example set in a Mediterranean scale, no, in the Mediterranean region. A second example that we wanted to share, thank you, Ferran, is an innovation camp that we organized also last year in 2 different sessions around the value of culture in rural revitalization in Catalonia. So the place-based limitation, to say, is the Catalan territory. So the objectives of these innovation camps were to gather cultural agents and rural development agents, because they needed a space to align and bring together these different positions towards a same directionality. They needed this space, not to generate these new alliances and explore what kind of coalitions they needed to bring together. And the guiding star that we set for this innovation camp is a living and dynamic and ecologically, socially and economically resilient rural territory in Catalonia. So here we set 5 challenges. Sorry, Ferran, if you could, yeah, perfect. So this is from a previous conversation with stakeholders that are involved in this challenge. We created these 5 subgroups of challenges related to culture and rural revitalization in Catalonia. No, the lack of visibility from rural areas, how generational change and this loss of rural knowledge, lack of spaces for socialization in rural and remote areas, uprooting of young people, degradation of natural heritage. So then we organized these 5 groups, working groups, with also a facilitator and a relator person referent. And then we worked in the Pentagon identifying the inhibitors and the facilitators, no? And then with this systemic exercise, we make sense, no, of the challenges, and it's also really important to for actors to be owners, no, of this process and of these challenges. They make sense also of their role, no, and are able to put in place what is their agency and their capacities, why the efforts that they are investing in so many innovation projects in these areas are not giving them the expected results. No, as Ferran was saying, why this system is not giving us what we expected from it. No, so then what are the systemic barriers that are inhibiting this progress, and what facilitator actors can help us leverage this systemic impact and move towards the shared vision of the future, no, and overcome finally overcome these challenges. So these mirrors screenshots are just examples of the result, but this was like just one of the sessions. But in other sessions, we worked in scaling up a bit these factors and also identifying what kind of actions these stakeholders can build with new coalitions and new partners that maybe they were far from each other before. And thanks to this space, they activated a transformative innovation process that otherwise would be difficult. And it's important also to reflect on the idea that innovation camps are different from classic workshops in the sense that they put people in a very in a set of innovation and creativity and flexibility. So as Christian was saying before, it's a space where there's freedom for actors to act based on their own agency. Maybe sometimes they are limited by their organizational structures and their entities, etc. But in an innovation camp, they put and set people and participants in a position of agency, and this is really key in engaging this process. And thanks to this innovation camp, we are now working in several transformative initiatives, and they will be working in several working groups to present projects and etc. etc. So this is two examples in a very specific way. And now Ferran wanted to explain also a very local, a very limited locally innovation camp organized as well in this framework.
Yes, thank you, Shema. Very briefly, so we've seen the larger case of the Mediterranean area. We've seen the case of Catalonia as a whole, and now this is the case of a region in the Pyrenees, the Sardegna region territory, in which they wanted to see how they could get to a more resilient agroforestry landscape in that region. So we, in the same way, we organized this innovation camp, in which at the first moment that they really focused on working towards defining this guiding star, this shared vision of the territory, because even if they are a small territory and everyone knows each other, they still held at that moment the different views of the territory, and they needed a place, in that case, the first session of an innovation camp, to build this shared vision of the future, this guiding star, which is in that case very, very long, but at least it's shared. And that was a first exercise to build this shared vision of the future. And then in that case also the pentagonal map helped us to again identify and analyze, and as Miriam said, to do it in a heuristical way, how the system looked like in that place, and how the different dimensions were relevant to the different challenges that were put in place in that territory. And then, well, they went through these different challenges. They thought of these challenges in a systemic way. They related it to the shared vision of the future that they defined it a bit before, and they tried to imagine how to overcome these challenges, how to address actions, how to work together in order to achieve the shared vision of the future by tackling each of these challenges. So this was a little bit all that we had to share at this first moment. Thank you very much for listening to us, and we are now welcoming your questions.
Thank you for sharing this work, and it's it's really inspiring. I think interesting from the TIP practitioner perspective, how there's no one system that you're looking at. The socio-technical system relates to the challenge and is different every time, and it's a really interesting interpretation that you're taking. So really happy to have a few minutes, hopefully 15-20 minutes, to discuss some of the issues that people have raised in the Mentimeter. I mean, I know, Miriam, there are quite a few challenges that have been mentioned, aren't there? I don't know whether you'd like to mention a couple of them, and we could perhaps see what the panelists, what kinds of questions would arise if you were to start looking at these challenges through a TIP lens.
Yes, sorry, Vicky, I was opening the slide.
Sure.
Yes, there are a few contributions to the Menti. So thank you very much for that to all of you who have written. You have always time to do that if you want to contribute. So there are several systemic challenges that are mentioned. For instance, housing shortages, stormwater and sewage pollution, lack of access to real-time information, and aspects related to data access, excessive reliance on tourism as economic activity with disturbing side effects. There is a challenge proposed in a positive way, in the sense that is it's written encouraging circular consumption from construction, built environment to food and other consumer goods in a geography, contributing to net zero. Aspects related to the regulatory burden and bureaucracy regarding, I guess, innovation policy making. So perhaps the people who have written about it want to develop it further. Air pollution, again, water governance, watershed management, changes in the agricultural system due to climate change, health challenges linked to lack of movement like obesity and diabetes. And there's a question on skills that perhaps we could move to the next part of the discussion. I know that some of that similar challenges are at least being tackled by the Catalan experience. So perhaps Shai and Ferran they want to comment on. I guess it's very difficult to just comment on all of them, but you may have an idea on how to start tackling this type of challenges.
Yeah, I think obviously they're very diverse, aren't they, from many different regions?
Yeah, which is also very interesting to see.
And you know, what kinds of questions would come up for you if you were thinking about these from a transformative innovation policy perspective? Should we start with Ferran, in my order of view?
Yes, it took my ear, the one about water governance, because we're certainly working in a region in Catalonia with this issue. And I think that what we are now seeing is that having this space, this innovation camps, or even before that, so some working sessions in which we try to bring all the actors that had something to say together. We give them voice to express how they view the challenge, and more importantly, to identify and recognize each other from each of the different perspectives. Now that they're starting to see that the problem is much broader than they thought of, that the solution they had in mind, maybe it's not working for all of the actors involved. No? So in this process, I think that having this idea of a more systemic view, and having this idea of how different dimensions or where enablers and inhibitors can exist in different dimensions of the system that is related to this challenge, it has helped them open their mind, open their view of the challenge, and see that they couldn't solve the problem alone, because they were seeing the problem only from one single angle, and they didn't regard the other parts. And now they're starting to realize this, and now they're starting to really see that they share a common purpose for the challenge and for the territory around and overcoming this challenge. And they are now starting to build these different coalitions.
Thank you. That's an interesting observation. And could we go to Chai and then maybe to Christian? And we've got quite a few questions. Try and be quite brief with the responses, and then we might be able to get to a few more in the time that we've got, if we can. Thank you.
Yes, I would. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, yes. Chai, if you'd like to go, then Christian, is that okay?
No problem.
Yeah, just to add what Ferran just also shared, because just I think also it's important to identify when a challenge is complex and when it's not, because maybe we are using instruments, like also to think about like how adapted the instruments that we want to implement are actually useful or not, no? Because maybe there is a problem that it's very linear. You maybe don't need to like engage in such a really high intensity and complexity coordination process, no? And maybe if it's a linear process, you can just engage in a linear process. But when we talk about complex challenges, no, it's what just Ferran said, no, they need each other, etc., etc. And there are systemic causes, and you can do it alone. You realize that you you need to have this systemic understanding of the issue, no. And then the second element I would say is identifying the owners of the challenge. It's really important to see if across a place-based challenge there are actors that are owners of that challenge, that they need to solve it, they're willing to solve it, and how you create this coalition of the willing, no, that have the volunteers, no, to address this challenge, because otherwise from an outside perspective, no, top-down operation, classic intervention, it's not going to work, no. I just leave these two like tips.
Thank you very much. Christian, would you like to say anything about those challenges?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up one that I found it very, very attractive, that is the lack of access to the real-time information and high costs associated. I think there is here a kind of like the point of an iceberg about the overall discussion on data governance in how it's generated, how it's shared, how it's unpacked, okay? When we think about climate adaptation and the decision-making, crisis management, disaster management, but also planning the infrastructure and running the infrastructure. So how we decentralize this kind of thing, how we can access data as a kind of a new resource to take decisions, to invest. So that is one of the big transformative elements that we can bring to the system, is kind of identifying the type of changes that we can bring to life, to have this distributed capacity across the different actors, not only multi-level, but also private and society, to access and use the data and information to take decisions and to plan. And one example on that could be connected to what it was mentioned in Catalonia, so is how this affects the digital transition in farming. I mean, there is a digital divide. Like SMEs and big companies can have better information to plan how the farming, the seasons, and the access to water and this kind of different type of thing. But small farmers that do not have access to digital solutions are actually marginalized in terms of catching up on the process and understanding how they need to adapt to the different ecosystems. And I think it doesn't need to be big solutions. I mean, the startups and the micro and the niche development can contribute a lot to fill that gap, but it's a kind of transformative aspect also in terms of what does it mean for a farmer to incorporate data to farming.
Thank you. Such interesting questions. Miriam, you mentioned there are quite a few questions. Given that we haven't got much time, are there a couple that you think would be interesting for people to tackle?
They are all interesting. We can send them later and perhaps foresee another meeting to discuss some of them, because but I have just selected I think that it's perhaps interesting to talk about what skills do you think are needed for people to engage in this type of policies, in transformative innovation policies, and to what extent you think are different from other type of from the skills that need to be fostered in other type of policy making, and how to justify working in this way, in the sense that there is a short-termism many times governing governments and politicians and all sorts of actors. So how do you navigate that expectation of the short term? And there is also a question on how do you translate this frame to other actors and citizens? How do you, whether you need to change language, for instance? I think Christian already mentioned a little bit about that, the need to translate, that we kind of act as intermediators and also translators of this framework.
Yeah, maybe we could go to Christian in the first instance to draw on one or two of those, you know, particularly what kind of skills you need.
Yeah, actually, I can even combine the points. I think one of the kind of radical turn in how we see this problem is trying to understand that some of the barriers are the skills of the future. Translating, adapting, communicating in this way. Now it's a barrier about between public and private or different sectors. Well, those are the skills that we really need. It's not a barrier, it's that now we need to incorporate those skills and competence in the current actors, or even identify new roles in terms of facilitators, intermediators, and that's part of the equation for the system. So we cannot see that as a barrier anymore. It's something that we just need to incorporate as part of the way that we work in the system. So facilitators, intermediators, people that are not afraid about trying to connect the dots between different views, that are new roles and competence that might be part of the team or needs to be incorporated to existing teams. So I think that's kind of what I mentioned before, is like, it's not about the lack of resources or technology of knowledge, but being brave enough to say, well, now we need an actor as an intermediator, as part of our team, as a stable position in organizations that deal with this kind of community and intermediation and have communication skills and so on. So I think that's kind of the challenge, is incorporating this kind of social skills as something so important as kind of financial management.
So interesting. So in tips, you might talk about shielding some of these skills, you know, that are taken for granted often. Chai and Ferran, did you have any reflections on that? Maybe perhaps starting with Chai?
Yes, to add as well a bit about what Christian said, which I agree completely, you know, related to skills. I think it's the one thing, no, that we learned, because we are like trained as policy officers, no, in a transformative innovation working place, which is something I think really relatively new to have like this professional profile, and it's a huge privilege to be able to say in a curriculum that you are a transformative innovator. It's something really amazing. And also there's like this transformative innovation area within the Generalitat of Catalonia, which is something also really, really particular. And I think that one of the skills that we had to learn, that it's sometimes it's not like written in any kind of manual, but it's like this ecosystemic thinking, no, or this ecosystemic ability to be able to engage with people and serve the ecosystem, no, and sometimes like being able to break hierarchies that sometimes are not as useful, that you can work in a workshop, for instance, with several officers and different departments and different colleagues with different roles, but you work no, horizontally, because you are interested in solving a challenge. So it doesn't matter which position you are, that your expertise and agency all is relevant to solving this problem. No? So this is a skill that I think it's really, really useful, really powerful as well. And no, breaking these silos that we are very used to work in silos and really unnecessary divisions. No? And then the second skill that I would say is tolerate uncertainty, and this is something with Miriam as well, that we work so much on this in our everyday, no, tolerate uncertainty, meaning that maybe we don't have a super clear path, maybe we don't have a super clean plan, we don't have a super clean timetable about all the actions that we will do, but we trust the process. Honestly, it's trust the process and trust your colleagues and the trust space that we create together in this different challenges that we work on. No, I will not be much longer, but I think these two are some key skills to me.
Thank you. It's the ways of working as well. So, Farron, did you have anything to add? And then I think we're going to need to close, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Yes, wanted to add to what Shaima was saying, because very close to what she was saying is that this skill to learn how to experiment and how to deal with this uncertainty and how to learn on the way. So and to be able to experiment in a place like public administration, you have to be flexible, very flexible in terms of adapting to each of the different scenarios in which you are playing. But you also need to understand very well how the system works. And here, when I say that the system, I'm referring to the public administration, because many times what happens is that people is trying to tell the administration how to innovate or how to do things, and they don't achieve the expected results just because they don't understand exactly from an insight point how the administration works. And this is something that it's very important to understand from which standpoint you're working, and from which standpoint you're trying to tackle challenges. And in a very practical way, one thing that we had to develop was this capacity to adapt to the very specific context. And a very clear example is that at the beginning, when we tried to use the pentagonal maps, we tried to really explain a lot the theory, the multi-level perspective, and to make the actors try to understand that they were part of a niche, and that they were trying to help the system and the regime to redefine itself, to become more closer to the future version of itself. And what we learned was that all this theory was confusing the actors in the ground. And that was not necessary for the actors in the ground to, at the first moment, to know all the theory. And the ones that needed to know the theory were us, the people proposing the methodology. And then the pentagonal map was useful itself, just to help the actors think of the different dimensions of the system, and to think in a systemical way, but without knowing the exact idea or nuance of it is a rule, it is a norm, it is something that belongs to the infrastructural dimension or not. By simplifying how we use the pentagonal map with the actors, we were capable of achieving the expected results in a systemic way, and also having a more fruitful discussion without having the actors losing themselves within the theory.
Thank you, Farron. There's such great insights. I think we could talk for a lot longer about this. It's a huge area and it's so important. As Christian said, it's really about the skills of the future. So we will need to close now, but I'd like to say thank you to our contributors, all of our contributors today. It's been a really interesting session. The idea was that this is a bit of a taster session, that we're sharing some examples from regions, and we wanted to show you where you can go for more information if you wish. So this is the website for the TIPSI Resource Lab and Knowledge Community. There's over 300 resources on that platform, and that's all open access. It's online, it's designed to be self-facilitated, so you can use that. We also have obviously the UNECE ETIN network platform, which is available. If you search for that online, you can find more information about ETIN. This is the information provided by our friends at the Government of Catalonia, with lots of resources on there in both English and Spanish that introduce the work that's been happening. Really fantastic material there that can be accessed and shared. And then finally, Christian, did you want to say anything about the different resources that JRC have that are useful for people wanting to go down this road further?
Yes, thank you, Vicky. So there is, you can Google and find any kind of material, including tools, database from the Knowledge for Policy website of the European Commission. I'm also sharing there some material that we have co-created with Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium, like the Motion Handbook, and some material of the EIT Climate Geek, also on system mapping and participatory methods. All this material and more material is coming soon about how we can embrace in practice transformative innovation policy. Thank you.
Thank you. So we hope this will be the start of a journey for many of you, and look forward to continued conversations as we take this forward together. Thank you all.